May 12, 1956. Tupelo, Mississippi. The crowd inside the Mississippi-Alabama Fair and Dairy Show had been deafening. For nearly 2 hours, thousands of teenagers screamed themselves hoarse as Elvis Presley moved across the stage. Girls cried, boys climbed over barriers, security struggled to maintain order. By the time the final song ended, Elvis's shirt was soaked with sweat, his legs ached, his throat burned, and he was starving. Not just him, his entire band. The four men had barely eaten all day. Tour schedules in 1956 were brutal. Long drives, little sleep, cheap motels, endless performances. The glamorous image people saw in magazines was only part of the story. Behind every successful show were exhausted musicians surviving on determination and coffee. As Elvis stepped off stage, he grabbed a towel and wiped his face. "Anybody else feel like they could eat an entire cow?" he joked. The men around him laughed. Marcus Green leaned against a wall. "I could eat too." Benny Parker shook his head. "You always say that." "Because it's always true." Samuel Wright smiled quietly. Unlike Marcus and Benny, Samuel rarely spoke unless he had something important to say. But when he did speak, everyone listened. Elvis laughed. "Well, boys, tonight we're doing it right." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I'm taking everybody to Rosie's." The room immediately became quiet. The reaction confused Elvis. Benny glanced toward Marcus. Marcus looked at Samuel. Samuel looked at the floor. For several seconds, nobody said anything. Elvis frowned. "What?" Marcus forced a smile. "Nothing." "No, seriously, what?" Benny finally spoke. "Maybe somewhere else would be better." Elvis stared at him. "Better than Rosie's?" "Maybe." Elvis laughed. "There's no better place in Tupelo." Nobody answered. The silence felt strange, but Elvis was too tired and hungry to think much about it. Instead, he grabbed his jacket. "Trust me." He pointed toward the door. "Best fried chicken in Mississippi." The men exchanged another glance. The kind of glance people share when they know something you don't. But none of them wanted to ruin the moment. Not tonight. Not after a successful show. Not after watching Elvis perform his heart out for 2 straight hours. So they followed him. Outside, the warm Mississippi night wrapped around them. The air smelled like summer. Crickets chirped in the distance. Cars rolled slowly down the streets. People still lingered outside the fairgrounds, hoping to catch a glimpse of Elvis. The moment he appeared, screams erupted. Teenage girls rushed toward him. Autograph books appeared from nowhere. Parents smiled proudly. Police officers tried to create space. Elvis handled it the way he always did. With patience. With kindness. With that easy smile that made people feel like they mattered. Nearly 20 minutes passed before they finally reached the car. By then, Marcus looked ready to collapse. "If that chicken isn't worth this, I'm quitting." Everyone laughed, even Samuel. The drive through Tupelo brought back memories for Elvis. Every street reminded him of childhood. The small house where he grew up, the school he attended, the church where he first discovered music. The neighborhood where people once wondered whether he would ever amount to anything. Now, he was the most famous young singer in America. Life had changed quickly, sometimes too quickly. He glanced at the men beside him. 6 months earlier, they had been strangers. Now, they felt like family. The road had a way of doing that. Long hours together created bonds most people never understood. They had seen each other at their best and at their worst. Elvis remembered one winter night in Arkansas when their tour bus broke down during a storm. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Nobody knew if help was coming. They spent 12 hours stranded on the side of a highway. Marcus told jokes the entire night. Benny played imaginary piano pieces on his knees. Samuel kept everyone calm. By sunrise, they weren't just co-workers anymore. They were brothers. Another memory surfaced, a motel owner in Tennessee refusing rooms at midnight. Not because of money, not because of availability, something else. At the time, Elvis hadn't fully understood what happened. He remembered Benny saying, "We'll figure something out," then disappearing with Marcus and Samuel. Elvis ended up sleeping inside. His bandmates slept somewhere else. He never asked questions. Looking back, he wished he had. The car turned onto Main Street, and there it was, Rosie's Diner. Bright red and white, exactly as Elvis remembered. A place filled with childhood memories, his mother bringing him there when money allowed, Rosie sneaking him extra pie, the smell of biscuits filling the air. For a moment, he smiled. It felt good to come home. The parking lot wasn't crowded, a good sign. They could eat quickly and get some rest. Elvis parked, turned off the engine, then noticed something. Nobody was moving. Marcus stared out the window. Benny rubbed his hands together nervously. Samuel avoided eye contact entirely. The smile slowly disappeared from Elvis's face. Something wasn't right. "You guys okay?" No answer. "Benny?" The piano player sighed heavily. "We should probably talk." Elvis frowned. "About what?" Another long silence. Finally, Samuel spoke, his voice quiet, careful, measured. "Elvis?" "Yeah? Maybe we shouldn't go in." Elvis looked confused. "Why not?" Nobody answered immediately. The three musicians exchanged glances again. The same glance. The one he'd been seeing all evening. Finally, Marcus leaned forward. "Because places like this—" He paused, then looked directly at Elvis. "Places like this don't usually serve people who look like us." The words landed like a hammer. For a moment, Elvis thought he'd misunderstood. Then realization began creeping in, slowly, painfully. He looked at Rosie's Diner, then back at his friends, then back at the diner. The truth started connecting itself. The hotel incidents, the restaurant excuses, the times they disappeared, the times they waited outside, the times they said they weren't hungry, the times they said they'd eat later. Suddenly everything made sense, and the realization made his stomach twist. "You mean—" Marcus nodded. "We mean exactly that." Nobody spoke. The silence felt heavier than anything they'd experienced on stage. Elvis looked at each man. Benny, Marcus, Samuel. Men he trusted, men he respected, men who had traveled thousands of miles beside him, men who helped create the music people were screaming for every night. And now they were sitting in a parking lot, wondering if they would be allowed inside a restaurant. Not because of anything they had done, but because of the color of their skin. Elvis felt anger rising, hot, immediate, personal. He turned back toward Rosie's Diner. The familiar building suddenly looked different. Less welcoming, less comforting, less like home. His jaw tightened. "What happens if we walk in?" The three musicians exchanged one final glance. Then Benny answered, "They'll probably seat you." A pause. "But not us." Elvis stared through the windshield. His hands slowly clenched into fists, and for the first time that night, he began realizing that the hunger in his stomach wasn't the only thing about to be tested. For several seconds, nobody moved. The car remained parked outside Rosie's Diner. The neon sign buzzed softly against the warm Mississippi night. Elvis stared through the windshield. His appetite had vanished. A few minutes earlier, he had been thinking about fried chicken and biscuits. Now, all he could think about was what Benny had just said. They'll probably seat you. But not us. The words echoed in his head, again, and again, and again. Finally, Elvis looked at his friends. How many times? Nobody answered. Elvis repeated the question. How many times has this happened? Marcus looked away. Samuel folded his arms. Benny sighed. Too many to count. The answer hit harder than Elvis expected. Hotels? Benny nodded. Restaurants? Another nod. Gas stations? Sometimes. Elvis sat silently. His chest felt tight. For 6 months these men had traveled beside him, performed beside him, protected him, supported him, and somehow he had missed what they were dealing with every single day. Not because they hid it, because he never asked. The realization hurt. More than he wanted to admit. Marcus noticed the expression on Elvis's face. Don't do that. Do what? Blame yourself. Elvis laughed bitterly. Seems like I should. No. Marcus shook his head. This isn't your fault. The drummer looked out the window. It's just how things are. That sentence somehow made everything worse. It's just how things are. The acceptance, the resignation, the exhaustion. Marcus wasn't angry anymore. That was the tragic part. He was used to it. All of them were. Elvis looked at Rosie's diner again, his childhood restaurant, his favorite place in town, a place filled with happy memories. And suddenly, he wondered how many people had been turned away from those same doors while he sat inside eating pie. The thought made him sick. Finally, he opened the car door. The others looked at him. What are you doing? Elvis stepped out. Eating dinner. Benny immediately understood. His eyes widened. Elvis! We came here together. Marcus shook his head. You don't have to prove anything. I'm not proving anything. Elvis closed the car door. I'm hungry. Then he looked directly at them. And I'm not eating without my band. Nobody moved. The 3 musicians exchanged glances. None of them believed this was going to end well. But eventually they stepped out too, together. The 4 men walked toward the entrance. The closer they got, the more nervous the musicians became, not because they didn't know what would happen, because they did. They had lived this moment hundreds of times. Different restaurant, different town, same outcome. Meanwhile, Elvis kept walking. The front door opened. A small bell rang overhead. Instantly, every conversation stopped. The effect was immediate, almost unnatural. Forks froze. Coffee cups stopped halfway to mouths. Heads turned. The entire restaurant stared. At first they noticed Elvis. Then they noticed who was standing beside him. The atmosphere changed. Elvis felt it immediately. The smiles disappeared. The warmth vanished. Something cold replaced it. Something uncomfortable. A young waitress approached. She couldn't have been older than 19. Her name tag read Susan. At first she looked excited. Then her eyes shifted toward Benny, Marcus, Samuel. The excitement disappeared. Fear replaced it. Mr. Presley. Her voice trembled slightly. We're honored to have you. Elvis smiled politely. Thank you. He pointed toward his friends. Table for 4. The waitress froze. For a moment, she simply stood there, as if hoping someone else would handle the situation. Then she swallowed hard. Sir. The room became even quieter. Elvis already knew. Before she said a word, he knew. Still, hearing it hurt. I'm afraid I can't do that. The words landed like a punch. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The restaurant seemed frozen in time. Elvis stared at her. "Can't do what?" The young waitress looked embarrassed, ashamed, uncomfortable. "Seat all four of you together." Elvis glanced at his friends. None of them looked surprised. That somehow hurt even more, because this wasn't shocking to them. It was normal, routine, expected. Before Elvis could respond, a voice emerged from the kitchen. A deep voice, confident, authoritative. "That's enough, Susan." The crowd parted slightly, and Harold Mitchell stepped forward, the owner of Rosie's Diner. A large man in his 50s, broad shoulders, white apron, hard eyes. Elvis recognized him immediately. He had known Harold most of his life. Years ago, Harold had been friendly. Years ago, things felt different. Now Elvis wasn't so sure. "Evening, Elvis." Harold's voice was calm, but not welcoming. "Not tonight." Elvis nodded. "Harold?" The older man folded his arms. "You know the situation." Elvis felt anger beginning to rise. "What situation?" Harold gestured toward Benny, Marcus, and Samuel. The movement was casual, dismissive, almost routine. "As long as you're here, you're welcome." He paused. "They aren't." The words hung in the air, heavy, ugly, final. Nobody in the restaurant looked surprised, which somehow made them worse, because this wasn't a difficult decision for Harold. This wasn't a moral struggle. It was policy, routine, normal. Elvis stared at him. "You've got to be kidding." Harold didn't blink. "No." A long silence followed. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Every customer watched, waiting, listening, wanting to see what happened next. Finally, Benny stepped forward, his voice calm, controlled. "It's okay, Elvis." Elvis turned toward him. "We'll wait outside." Marcus nodded. "Seriously." Samuel added quietly, "We're used to it." There it was again. Those words, the same acceptance, the same pain hidden beneath calm voices. Elvis felt something break inside him. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. Enough to realize he couldn't pretend anymore, couldn't ignore it anymore, couldn't walk past it anymore. For 6 months these men had stood beside him, night after night, show after show, city after city, and now they were standing calmly in a restaurant being told they weren't welcome, as if it were perfectly normal, as if they deserved it, as if they expected it. Elvis slowly looked around the room, every face watching, every eye waiting, every person wondering what America's biggest star would do. Would he stay? Would he leave? Would he stay silent? Or would he speak? The answer was only seconds away, and it would change everything. The silence inside Rosie's Diner felt unbearable. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working. The entire restaurant watched Elvis Presley, waiting, judging, wondering. America's biggest star stood only a few feet from Harold Mitchell. On one side stood comfort, acceptance, the easy choice, a hot meal, a familiar restaurant, a quiet evening. On the other side stood his friends. 3 men who had spent months helping build his career. 3 men who had stood beside him every night on stage. 3 men who were now being told they weren't welcome because of the color of their skin. Elvis looked at Benny, then Marcus, then Samuel. He saw something in their faces, not anger, not surprise, something worse. resignation. The look of people who had been disappointed so many times they no longer expected anything different. That look broke his heart. Finally, Harold spoke again. "Elvis," his tone was impatient now, "we don't have all night." The owner pointed toward an empty booth. "You can sit down and eat." Then he gestured toward the door. "They can wait outside." The words echoed through the restaurant. Elvis felt anger surge through him, but beneath the anger was sadness, because Harold genuinely didn't seem to understand what was wrong. To him, this was normal, reasonable, acceptable. That realization was frightening. Elvis took a deep breath, then another. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost too calm. "Let me ask you something, Harold." The owner folded his arms. "What?" Elvis pointed toward Benny. "Do you know who he is?" Harold shrugged. "No, that's Benjamin Parker." The restaurant remained silent. Elvis continued. "One of the finest piano players I've ever heard." He pointed toward Marcus. "That's Marcus Green." Then Samuel. "And that's Samuel Wright." Nobody responded. Elvis shook his head. "That's the problem." Harold frowned. "What are you talking about?" "You don't know them." The owner rolled his eyes. "I don't need to know them." "Exactly." Elvis nodded slowly. "You've already decided what they are without knowing who they are." A few customers shifted uncomfortably. The room's mood was changing. Harold noticed it too. His expression hardened. "This isn't about that." "No?" Elvis stepped forward. "No." Harold pointed toward the door. "This is about rules." The word immediately caught Elvis's attention. Rules. That was what people always called it. Rules. As if changing the name somehow made it right. As if injustice became acceptable once it was written down. Elvis looked around the restaurant, at the customers, at the waitress, at the cooks peeking through the kitchen window. Then he spoke louder, loud enough for everyone to hear. "My mother taught me something when I was a boy." The room became silent again. Elvis continued. "She said if a rule forces you to treat someone like they matter less than you do..." A pause. "It's a bad rule." Nobody spoke. Even Harold remained silent. Elvis turned toward his friends, then back toward the owner. "And I don't follow bad rules." A ripple moved through the restaurant. People exchanged nervous glances. Harold's face turned red. "Be careful, Elvis." The warning wasn't subtle. Everyone heard it. Everyone understood what it meant. Your career, your reputation, your future. Be careful. Elvis understood too, probably better than anyone, because he knew exactly what could happen. Sponsors could disappear. Radio stations could stop playing his music. Fans could turn against him. Promoters could cancel shows. Everything he had built could begin falling apart. The year was 1956. Mississippi wasn't known for rewarding people who challenged segregation. Quite the opposite. Harold stepped closer, his voice lower now, more dangerous. "You've got a lot to lose." The words hung in the air. For a brief moment, Elvis said nothing. Because Harold was right. He did have a lot to lose. His career was exploding. Every record was selling. Every show was packed. Every newspaper seemed to have his face on the front page. One wrong move could change everything. The room waited. Customers leaned forward. The young waitress held her breath. Benny looked worried. Marcus looked nervous. Samuel stared at the floor. Then Elvis looked at the three men standing beside him. And suddenly the answer became simple. Because he realized something. If success required him to abandon his friends, then it wasn't success worth having. He slowly smiled, then looked directly at Harold. "You know something?" "What?" Elvis pointed toward Benny, Marcus, Samuel. "They helped build everything I have." Harold rolled his eyes. "Come on, Elvis." "No." Elvis shook his head. "I'm serious." His voice grew stronger. "People buy tickets to hear me sing." He pointed toward the band. "But these men are part of every note." A pause. "Every show." Another pause. "Every success." The room remained completely silent. Then Elvis delivered the words nobody expected. "If they're not good enough to eat here," he looked directly into Harold's eyes, "then neither am I." The sentence hit the restaurant like lightning. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody even blinked. The young waitress covered her mouth. Several customers stared in disbelief. Marcus looked shocked. Benny's eyes widened. Samuel slowly raised his head. Even Harold seemed stunned, because nobody thought Elvis Presley would actually say it. The biggest star in America, standing in the middle of Mississippi, refusing service, choosing his band over his own comfort, choosing principle over convenience, choosing friendship over fame. Harold recovered first. His face burned with anger. "You'd walk away over this?" Elvis nodded. "Without hesitation." The owner laughed bitterly. "You'll regret it." Elvis smiled. "Maybe." Then he glanced toward his friends. "But I'd regret staying a lot more." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Elvis turned toward the door. "Come on, boys." The three musicians stood frozen, almost unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Benny finally found his voice. "Elvis." The singer looked back. "You don't have to do this." Elvis smiled sadly. "Yeah." A pause. "I do." Then he pushed open the diner door and walked out, his friends following behind him. The restaurant remained silent long after they were gone, because everyone inside understood something important had just happened. Something bigger than dinner, something bigger than a restaurant, something bigger than Elvis Presley himself. And by sunrise the next morning, the entire country would be talking about it. The moment Elvis Presley walked out of Rosie's diner, he knew there would be consequences. What he didn't know was how quickly they would arrive. The four men climbed into the car. For several moments, nobody spoke. The emotions were too heavy. The night felt different now. The excitement after the concert had vanished. Something far more important had happened. Elvis started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness. Still, nobody said a word. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "Elvis?" The singer glanced at him. "Yeah? You understand what this might cost you?" Elvis nodded. "I think so." Marcus shook his head. "No." A pause. "I don't think you do." The drummer looked out the window. "This isn't New York." Another pause. "This isn't California." His voice grew quieter. "This is Mississippi." The reality settled over the car. Everyone knew what he meant. The South had rules, unwritten rules, rules that many people followed without question, rules that protected some people and punished others. Elvis understood that, but he also knew something else. Some things were more important than staying comfortable. The group eventually found a small restaurant several miles away, a place that welcomed all four of them. Nothing fancy, just burgers, coffee, and respect. To Elvis, it tasted better than any meal he'd ever eaten. Hours later, they returned to their motel. exhausted. Certain the story would end there. They were wrong. The next morning began with a phone call, then another, then another. By noon, reporters were calling from across the South. By evening, newspapers were already preparing headlines. Word had spread faster than anyone expected. America's biggest music star had walked out of a restaurant rather than leave his black bandmates behind. People had opinions, strong opinions. Some praised him, others condemned him. There seemed to be no middle ground. 3 days later, the first sponsorship cancellation arrived, then another, then another. A beverage company ended its contract. A clothing sponsor withdrew support. Several business partners quietly distanced themselves. Colonel Tom Parker was furious. The moment he entered Elvis's hotel room, everyone could see it. The manager slammed a newspaper onto the table. "What were you thinking?" Elvis looked up calmly. "I was thinking my friends deserved dinner." "This isn't funny." "I know." Parker pointed at the newspaper. "Do you have any idea how much money this is costing us?" Elvis leaned back in his chair. "No." The manager's face reddened. "Over $100,000 already." The room became silent. That amount of money was enormous in 1956. Most people would never earn that much in a lifetime. Yet Elvis barely reacted. Colonel Parker couldn't believe it. "Say something." Elvis looked at him. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to tell me it was worth it." The manager crossed his arms, then waited. Without hesitation, Elvis answered. "It was." Parker stared at him. Elvis continued. "If I have to choose between money and my friends—" A pause. "I'm choosing my friends every time." The manager shook his head in disbelief. "You'll never understand business." Elvis smiled slightly. "Maybe." Then his expression became serious. "But I understand loyalty." For several moments, nobody spoke. Finally, Parker grabbed the newspaper and left. The door slammed behind him. Marcus, Benny, and Samuel had heard everything. They stood quietly in the hallway. When Elvis emerged, all 3 men looked uncomfortable. Benny spoke first. "This is our fault." Immediately, Elvis shook his head. "No." "Elvis, no." His voice was firm. "This isn't your fault." Marcus stepped forward. "People are attacking you because of us." Elvis looked at his friend. "No." A pause. "They're attacking me because of what they believe." The drummer fell silent. Then Samuel finally spoke. As usual, his words were few, but powerful. "You could have walked away." Elvis looked at him. "Maybe." Another pause. "But then I'd have to live with myself." Nobody had an answer for that. The following weeks became a storm. Radio stations announced boycotts. Angry letters flooded mailboxes. Some fans publicly destroyed Elvis records. Several concert promoters expressed concern. People predicted the end of his career. Many were convinced he'd made a terrible mistake. But something unexpected happened. The opposite. New fans appeared. Record sales increased. Supporters emerged from places nobody expected. Young Americans began seeing Elvis differently, not just as a singer, not just as a performer, but as someone willing to stand for something. The story spread beyond Mississippi, beyond the South, beyond music. People who had never listened to Elvis records suddenly knew his name. Not because of a song, because of a choice. And that choice inspired others. Months passed. Then, nearly a year. Rosie's Diner remained unchanged at first. The same policies, the same signs, the same attitude. But business slowly declined. Some customers stopped coming. Others chose different restaurants. Many people simply couldn't forget what had happened there. The diner became known for the wrong reason, not its food, not its history, its refusal. Eventually, the signs disappeared, quietly, without ceremony, without explanation. No apology followed, no speech, no announcement. Just empty spaces where they once hung. But by then, the damage had already been done. Meanwhile, Elvis continued traveling with Benny, Marcus, and Samuel. The bond between them grew stronger, not because of success, because of trust. They knew something now. When things became difficult, Elvis would not abandon them. And Elvis knew something too. His friends weren't beside him because he was famous. They were beside him because they cared about him. Years later, Benny Parker would remember that night better than any concert, better than any recording session, better than any award, because awards faded, crowds disappeared, fame changed, but character remained. When reporters asked why he respected Elvis so much, Benny always gave the same answer. It wasn't what he did on stage. A pause. It was what he did when nobody would have blamed him for staying silent. That was the difference. Silence would have been easier. Silence would have been safer. Silence would have been profitable. But silence would have been wrong. As time passed, the story became something larger than the four men involved. It became a reminder that courage rarely appears in grand moments. Usually it appears in ordinary places, a restaurant, a conversation, a simple decision, one choice, one sentence, one moment when a person decides enough is enough. Looking back, Elvis never described himself as a hero. He never claimed he changed the world. He never bragged about what happened. In fact, when people praised him, he usually changed the subject, because in his mind, the decision had been simple. Friends stand together, or they don't. There was no middle ground. The lesson remains just as powerful today. Every generation faces moments when staying silent feels easier, moments when speaking up carries a cost, moments when doing the right thing threatens comfort, popularity, or success. Those are the moments that reveal who we truly are, not when everyone agrees with us, not when courage is rewarded, but when courage is expensive. On May 12, 1956, Elvis Presley entered Rosie's Diner as the biggest star in America. By the time he walked out, he had become something far more important, a man who chose integrity over convenience, friendship over comfort, principle over profit. And sometimes, those are the choices that history remembers longest.